Oh, 30 seconden, jongens. Kom maar. Ik ben er helemaal klaar voor. Ik wacht wel op het seintje voor Maarten. Helemaal op tijd beginnen. Helemaal nieuw dit. Ja. Duurt lang. Daarvoor, je wordt al gestreamd. Ja, heel goed. Nou, welkom iedereen. En ook natuurlijk naar de kijkers thuis. Bij, bij de eerste editie van de Coven of Wisdom. De herfsteditie is dit. We hebben onze meetup gerebrand. Kom maar trouwens op tegen ons over, of niet?
Zeker.
Yes, sure. So for the viewers at home, we switch to English. We have rebranded the meetup to the Coven of Wisdom. For people that are asking why this isn't working.
Turned off.
Because it's not plugged in, right? So, what is a coven? A coven is a gathering of people that are like-minded, usually witches, or in our case, we like to see it as a gathering of pitches of people that present their ideas to others and share their knowledge and their insights to others. So this will be our first edition. And we will have this Coven of Wisdom every quarter of the year at the first Thursday of every new season. So the next Coven will be the winter edition on December 22nd. That's 22nd, that's right. Okay. Thank you for correcting me. Then we have the spring edition on March the 23rd. And the summer edition is also planned at June 22nd. But back to where we came from. So this is the autumn edition. The leaves aren't actually falling yet, but I think that will be soon. But it's already damn cold, right? And we have to turn down our gas consumption, so it will be quite cold winter as well. For the program of today, well, we just ate our pizzas, so if you are at home, sorry for that. And then we have two speakers today. One is Dave Pitter, our colleague from Amsterdam, right?
Yes.
Yes, right. And he will tell us something about the full stack framework in JavaScript. So I'm very eager to hear about that, because a long time ago I did full stack development. So
Then you're gonna love this.
all right. That's why I turned away from full stack development, right? Okay. And then Vincent will tell us something about testing, and we're really looking forward to that as well. So, something about Dave. I found a nice picture of you, and I noticed that your head is turned around, so I fixed that.
Thank you. It looked better on my website like that.
And so, Dave, I think the stage is yours, and we're really eager to hear from you.
Thank you. Yeah, the clicker was turned off. That's why it didn't work. Work. Okay. Yeah, hello, I'm Dave. I'm a developer advocate at IO Amsterdam. Second time I've been here. Always happy to be here for the pizzas as well. Yeah, today I'm going to talk about Remix, full stack web framework. Which is going to be, well, it's about Remix, but it's more about the web and the browser, but basically the web platform instead of all these new ways of doing things. Let's just return back to how the web actually works, make things simple. Just for me, how many people here have heard about Remix or worked with it? And with React. Next. Okay, very good. You will see a lot of things that sound familiar, so that's good. And for those who haven't, it's actually good because we're going to talk about the web a lot. So, as I said, Remix is a full stack web framework based on web fundamentals. That's really important. So it's not just, oh, this is JavaScript and we can run it on a server and on a client, but it's really focused towards serving the web and utilizing all the benefits of the web as a platform. And Remix is also a framework to build over-engineered websites with capital letters. So this is something somebody tweeted to me. I anonymized them, so let's call him a guy on the internet. So basically said, hey, this Remix thing looks pretty cool. And he said, well, it's built for over-engineered websites, and that I don't know the difference between a website and a web app. It's very interesting, as he was tweeting that from a web app. So the difference between websites and apps the lines have become so blurry between the two that people sometimes don't even notice. So of course, I went in on the tweet because I needed an intro for this talk. So that's great. So I told them it's not just a framework, it's basically a platform that tries to combat over-engineering by just making things simple again and not reinvent the wheel. So it does this by relying heavily on web fundamentals, progressive enhancement, so basically the good old of the web combined with new tools for modern UX. Then again, of course, you're never going to win an argument on the internet, especially not on Twitter. And I'm still talking about web apps and not standalone programs for mobile devices. And then when you try to mash them together, you will inevitably be fail at being good at one or the other. And I partly agree. And I think definitely there's a place for native, there's a place for the web. But I think sometimes we forget how powerful the web actually is. We try to mimic a lot while we shouldn't. So we should embrace the web as a platform way more. Of course, I never want to lose an argument on the internet. So you become very literal. You say, well, web apps, right? It's a progressive enhancement layer. So we first built the basics, then we enhance for modern user experience that the user is expecting from us at the moment. But you can enhance even further by, for instance, turning it into a progressive web app, if that makes sense. But I sense this frustration, which I definitely had a lot. There are all these frameworks, and you have to learn new patterns every time. And Remix is no other the same. You have to learn some patterns, the way they do it in Remix. But the thing that they all have in common is, in the end, we're built for the web. You will see throughout this talk that there's a lot of basic things that we don't need to reinvent. So we all have this friend who said, hey, you should totally come to this party. It's going to be great. You should see the lineup. This and this person is going to be there. It's all good vibes. And sometimes new frameworks kind of feel like this, right? They hear Dave saying, hey, the remix is great. And then you actually start working with it. It's like, it's really annoying. But you get FOMO, right? Am I still being relevant if I don't pick up this framework? Should I really? Everybody's so excited. I should learn this. But often you run into the same issues. I just picked 5 of them. Doesn't really matter. I think with every framework you run into things like, oh, suddenly, but I have complex state. So yeah, your README is great, but for my use case, that doesn't fly. It's way more complex, and a bunch of other reasons. So this is where Remix comes in, and they try to simplify basically building an app for the internet, and it gives you the tools to progressively enhance your application to be up to par with modern UX, but still work when not everything is available. So this dreaded logo, I think we all know quite well from our lockdown period. All these Teams meetings, but especially in-person events, for instance, Scrum events that you suddenly had to do online. It was really annoying, especially when you need to do some Scrum poker and you need to say, oh, I think this story is 5 points or 8 points. And you stand there with your fingers on the screen and it's blurry. It's very difficult. So this became old really quick. So I was looking at it, and as a true developer, you think, well, can't I build something better? Let's just make an app for this. And then I thought, well, this is basically a real-time multi-user app. A lot of data, complexity, it needs to update, state. This is a good test to try Remix out. So what do we need to do? We have a couple of features. Well, we need to create or join a session. That's a basic functionality. In that session, you probably want to cast a vote saying, hey, this is 8 story points, this is 3. Some administrator needs to toggle the vote so everybody can see, and you want to reset the round. So this is what we're going to build in this talk with Remix and with web fundamentals. So the tech stack, naturally, we're going to use Remix. I did it to persist some data, basically have a database, and I don't like Firebase as much. Well, it's the whole Google thing. That's your own, whatever you think about that. But I think it's also very difficult to set up, and there's a bunch of errors. And I was like, you know what? Let's try Superbase, which I can highly recommend, which is the less evil brother of Firebase, in my opinion. And then we needed some styling, so for quick prototyping, Tailwind is also good. So it looks a bit like this. This is the entire app. You have basically create a new session or join an existing session, and then we have another page where you can actually cast your vote, and an admin can toggle whether the votes are visible or clear the votes to go to a next round. And if you've worked with Remix and in a bit also in Next.js, as this is all moving to React Router, it actually already did. Here we go. It looks a bit like this. We have some routes. We have an index route where we have the forms, and then we have a dynamic page for the session. They can do really cool stuff with routing, but you can find all of that in the README, so it would be a shame if I tell that here. Okay, so let's dive a bit into this page. This is a standard page that I think nearly all of us have built. You have some form, you need to input some data and send it to a backend. So if we look at the first form, super simple. We have one input and a submit button. And it looks a bit like this. So all the code examples that I'm going to show are very simplified to save some space. But in essence, how do you make a form? Well, you make a form, you could say the method is post, we have a label, an input, and a submit button. Next step, what we usually do with, for instance, when you do a create React app, is unsubmit, I'm going to prevent the default. That's the first thing. I'm going to prevent everything the web platform is supposed to do. Then I'm going to basically call an API. That API will receive, well, in this case, my name, and it will create a session, and it will tell me what to do. And it's a shame, because forms work really well. It's a proven technology on the web. Every browser supports it. So that works great. So how can we actually handle form submissions with Remix? We can do this in the same file by exporting something that's called an action. And all this is a function that runs on the server. And whenever you post to this file, so on the slash route, this will receive the request. Well, in that request, you will see something familiar, which is just request.form data. You get whatever was submitted. So no APIs, nothing in between. It's just regular old submit. You get the form data. Cool thing is, even without JavaScript, of course, when you submit a form, this will all still work. So here I can get the name, create a new session ID. A nice tip, you have something called human readable IDs. It's a bit nicer to share a bit of a nicer readable ID instead of a big generated one. So here I can call the Superbase. I can say, well, make a new session, insert it with this ID, and then something cool happens. And this is really Remix at work. I need to return something. So I can either return a redirect. Everything went fine. I'm just going to redirect you to your session page. But you can see that I can also return basically just an object. What does this do? Well, on the line underneath, I say, hey, I want to use action data. That's something we import from Remix. And what Remix will do when there's client-side JavaScript, whenever you post to this action, you return an object, for instance, error or validations. Let's do them all server-side. This is super quick. You can return, for instance, in this case, some errors, and then display it, of course, in your UI. Cool thing is, if there is no JavaScript on the client, this also still works, because it's a regular old post to a backend. That's going to re-render a page, and then this action data will be filled with whatever you put in. So this is a really important concept of how Remix works. In the same file, you have a server part and a client part, and they can easily talk with each other. So that's it. That's how you do your data. That's how you do all your forms. No APIs, no cores, no API key, security, spinning that up, having all these services, putting something in between. It's just post to the server, like the good old days. But what happens when you have two forms, like for instance in our use case, because if it posts to that same action, which one is it? Well, another old trick that some people might remember here is say, okay, then I have a hidden input, and I'm going to say this is the join session form, or this is the create session form. And what we can then do in that action is say, well, based on that, I want to do some logic. So I want to create a session, do that, otherwise join the session. And that's basically it. That's all the interactivity. And when I was building this, I didn't even have JavaScript turned on, because back in the day, I think they changed it now. By default, Remix had JavaScript turned off to make a point, I guess, to people. Like, hey, look, everything works, but you don't even have client-side JavaScript. I think they turned it on now, which is a shame. Cool. So that's super simple, and then it would be a very short talk, but let's have a look at more challenging stuff, right? This is what you find in the README. It's a form, there's an action, you post some data, you show an error. But what happens if we have this? Because we have multiple parts on this page. We basically have some data that we need to load. So for instance, what everybody's vote was. But also, we have an entire interactive part with multiple things. So you basically want to cast a vote, but as an admin, you might want to toggle the votes. So you say, oh, show the votes for everybody, or clear the votes and go to a next round. And in the end, of course, if you want to have somebody join or you have your team join, it's nice to just send a link in the chat. So we need a way for them to join this exact session. So if you look a bit at that, here you can see the human readable IDs in action. So Splendid AL40, it's a bit easier than, well, I'm not going to say an entire ID, but you get what I mean. So again, not even just Remix, but really thinking from what does the web already offer for us. We can, for instance, say, well, copy this to clipboard with this button. But for instance, on mobile phones, you often have the share API. So it directly opens the share menu and probably Slack or based on whatever file type you have. So not just Remix, but just once you're in this mindset, it's like, hey, what else does the web offer that I don't need to custom build? So it looks a bit like this. You run this on some domain, and then on the home page where we have the two forms, we say, I'm going to pass a parameter here called join the session ID of Splendid AL40. So if you now go to the previous page that we built, so this is the full page as we built it, You can see that we use something else from Unix, which is called use search params. So you get the search params. I think that makes sense. But the cool thing here is this also works on the server. So the first time the page renders, it's on the server, of course. But if you check this on the client, you say, oh, we get the window location and then whatever, or however you want to do it. The client's already there. So you get this flash in the UI if you want to change something. So you want to do this already on the server. Well, luckily we can do it. So here we get the session ID. And then, well, we don't need a create session page because, yeah, you're joining. That's the intent. That's why you're opening the link. So we can already hide that. But also make smart decisions like, oh, you probably want to focus then on the username field to help the user a bit. And all of this already happens on the server. So even without, again, I'm going to say that a lot, but even without client-side JavaScript, this already is running. And you can imagine how quick that is if you just get served HTML. So now the page looks a bit like this, which is great. You fill in your name, you join a session, and then you just follow the logic that you already had for that page. So that's cool, but what about loading data? So okay, we can post data and it returns something, but if I just want to load data? I just want to have the latest state, basically, of this current session. I want to retrieve that. So, guessed it, there was an action, there's also a loader. So the loader behaves exactly the same. A user visits a page, hits the URL. It's first going to go to this loader. It's an async function, so you can basically fetch the latest session. You might redirect if the session doesn't exist, whatever how you want to handle it. And then next, you use the use loader data hook. And this loader data hook will then be filled with whatever you return. So in our case, the data and the errors. And it does all of this, of course, server-side again. After that, the client hydrates. Another good benefit about this is we can bail out early. So if there's no session data, the entire front end of this page, the entire page is not being loaded at all. You're being redirected. So I think that's also a nice added benefit, no flashing of UI or all those old hacks that we needed to do. So that's data. It's that. I kind of feel like Steve Jobs. It's that easy. But that's all there is, right? It's a serverless function, yeah, or a function on server, I should say. That's a bigger discussion. So now the interactive part, because this is usually where at least I in old projects failed to make this non-client-side JavaScript working. Because there's a lot of interactions, and the first thing when I need to build something like this, like, okay, I need an API, and I'm gonna have on-click handlers, and I need some state for whatever vote the user has selected, or none. Let's dive a bit into this. So we basically have 3 micro forms, as I like to call them. So we have, for instance, this bit just for the votes. We have a little form that says show the votes, and a little form that says clear the votes. Because again, how are you going to make this work without client-side JavaScript if it's just a regular button? Let's first look at the votes. Looks a bit like this. It's radio button group. That's all it is, because radio buttons do exactly what I needed to do. You can only select one. When I select the new one, that becomes active. The old one becomes inactive. I don't need state for this. I can just use CSS basically for this. A downside is I need to, whenever I say I want to vote 8, I need to hit the submit button. Oh no, it's 3. Hit the submit button. So there's basically twice the effort as normally. And you don't want to do that. So here we can enhance, right? You know, this works regardless whether you have client-side JavaScript, we can enhance this. So how we can do this is with the use submit hook. And all this basically does is say, okay, I want to submit this form. So we say, oh, when they're on change, we don't prevent default. We like the default. That's actually what we try to accomplish here. But we say, okay, submit this. And then in the end, it's just the same if somebody just hits submit. But yeah, now we have a submit button, which is annoying, which you don't want. And definitely your visual designer or UX designer will say, it's not needed, can we remove it? For the CSS nerds in the room, there are better ways of doing this. But for instance, what we could do is this super simple setup where we say, okay, I can put a CSS class on some elements where we say, there's no JavaScript, show this or hide this, right? It's based on whatever you need. So we can actually say, okay, because we can do this with JavaScript, of course, because if there's no JavaScript, you also can check if there's JavaScript. Cool, so now we just show it whenever there's no client-side JavaScript, so that's this view. Otherwise we, just remove it. So these two buttons, because this was the first real headache for me. I was like, yeah, how can I make this work? And then in the end, I was looking at it, and I was like, aren't these basically just two forms? We can reuse the hidden input trick to say which one it is and just submit it. And indeed, that works. So now I still don't need an API, I still need cores, I still don't need API keys or whatever, and I don't need client-side JavaScript. Okay, so far everybody could just post whatever. I think at the start of this app I used somebody's username in the URL, so I could quickly prototype this. But that's not the best, of course. You want to have some security in your application and just post or change the data that you're allowed to. But also when you're an admin, only admins can actually toggle it instead of somebody else. So how do you do that? Do we need some fancy new library, or what do we need? Actually just server sessions. And actually pretty fun. Before this I didn't really work with it. So I had to actually look up the MDN docs, which you are in a lot when you work with Remix. This is great. So basically what I can do is I can have this be available on the server for you. That's your session. So I can store whatever I want in there, like a user ID. And then I can actually use it something like this, where you say, oh, this is the cookie session, and whenever we create a new session, I'm going to use that session ID as the key, and then maybe store some data like my username and a generated user ID that I can later on use. I can use it a bit like this. So this is a good example where I say, okay, I'm going to cast a vote. I'm going to say it's 8 points. How do I know who it is? I don't actually need to send it. I can just check, hey, what's the server session? Who is this guy? Oh, that's Dave, of course. And then I'm going to store it with his user ID attached. And again, here you can also check, oh, is this guy then an admin? Can he actually toggle it or not? Taking it even further, you also maybe want to just expose the data, and this is a good practice in general, but just the data that the front end actually needs. So all my users don't need everybody's user ID, of course. They just need to know their name and what they voted. And as this loader is just being ran on the server and is returning some data, we can actually strip everything out and just send them back whatever they need. So making it a bit more secure, because I really want to leverage this server part and this client part, is in Superbase, basically I blocked everything. Like you can't update, you can do CRUD on anything, just block it. And then we have this super special server only token that can basically override these policies. So it doesn't matter if you say you can't change this, it will. But the nice thing is that because we have this server bit where we're doing all our data fetching, but also our mutations, we can actually say, okay, there I can just use that key to update everything. And then it became very slow, because you can imagine you hit a button, does a form post to a server that's going to say something to Superbase, it's going to get a response, and it's going to send back that response, and I'm going to update my UI. And I just want to click and see that it actually gave feedback that I have the correct vote. So it's very sluggish, and what you can actually use for this is something, and Remix offers you the tools for this, is called optimistic UI. Optimistic UI is basically saying, I'm very optimistic that this will work. Right? I'm going to say I want to cast a vote of 8, and I'm fairly certain that there's nothing is going to error. So maybe we can already update the UI to show that we selected 8, and then in the background it can actually store it. And once it comes back, we can always revert it if something goes wrong. Because let's be honest, in 99.9% of the use cases, it will go right. Hopefully. Otherwise, you have other issues. So how do you do that? Use something called use transition, which they offer. And basically what use transition is, it's a little piece of state. So it, of course, it only works when there's client-side JavaScript. But there you can get the state of the form. So is it idling, just sitting there, or is it actually submitting? If it's submitting, it will have a key called submission, where we have the exact same form data that the backend is going to receive. So we can use this to basically get the effort, as I call it in this case, and then say, okay, maybe some bit of local state and just show it. Nice thing is, when it's done submitting, whether it's successful or erroring, that submission is gone. So we can clear it, of course. I think I even do it manually here. So yeah, even without, keep saying no client-side JavaScript, I mean, if there's none, this will not work. Also perfectly fine, but it's truly an enhancement on the user experience, makes it a bit quicker. But then going real time, and I was like, oof, that's difficult. And naturally, without my client-side JavaScript, I can make it go real time. But how much effort will it take me to make this app fully real time for maybe 10 users at the same time? Turns out pretty simple, because we build it in this progressively enhanced manner. It was really easy to add this layer. But we needed to, of course, update the votes, maybe show or hide the votes, start a new round, so on, so on. So how do I do it? I made this small React hook. Even if you don't know React, in essence, what we do here is say, I have a query, I'm going to subscribe on it, and as soon as I get something back, I call the callback. Whatever I get back is just a record as being updated. So let's say you cast from 8 to 5, it will just receive, hey, this guy voted 5. So natural instinct is, great, I have the data, I'll update the UI, be done with it. You can imagine having 8 people continuous clicking on the screen and trying to stress test it. You get all these updates, and suddenly I was having local state of all the users and updating it, and I ran into these weird issues because some requests came sooner than others, which was really annoying. So I thought, how can I do this better? Because basically, the latest version of the state is in the database. Can I just say, I want that? And we did that earlier, actually, in the loader. We basically said, give me the latest state of this current session. So I did the same here, and we use something, and I promise this is the last hook, and I'll talk about is use fetcher. And basically what we can do there is say, okay, I want to rerun that loader, and I want to have the results that it gives me. So I don't need any extra code. I already got it. It's already fetching the latest one. Let's just manually call that. So I do that here. I say basically whenever there's an update on, for instance, the session or on the votes, whenever there's an update for the current session, I want you to rerun that loader and just give me the latest. I don't care what it is now, just give me the latest. And then the UI updates. So this is all. These 2 slides, basically having this custom hook here and adding these lines, basically made my entire app real time. I think that's the true power of progressive enhancement, where you can just add this light layer on top of it and make everything behave as you want it to. So that's great. So that's true plus for this. So then you test it out with your colleagues, and my colleagues are developers. So of course, some usernames like drop table, so on. I got entered. You can imagine that's the first thing they do. Luckily, I was guarded against that. But more importantly, I suddenly had 10 people who were stress testing it, clicking, just continuously changing everything. So my poor free super base description with all these updating votes and refetching and so on. But I actually thought about it, and then I was thinking, well, we added this optimistic UI, so it doesn't matter for you, even if it's slow, even if I throttle the hell out of it. It doesn't matter for you because you have instant feedback. And if another person casts a vote, you don't know when they clicked it. So if there's a second there, who's really going to care? So that perceived performance basically will be covered by that. So just added a throttle, and luckily everything was working fine. So that's how I made this entire application, basically using web fundamentals, just regular old forms, slightly enhancing it layer by layer. And I ended up with basically having no state in my entire application on the client. And well, the database has it, but that's what databases are good at, to store something. So I talk a lot about forms, and basically in all the readmes, and that's what you usually see when you see these talks. It's all about, I have a form and I store some data. It's like, yeah, I know, but what if that's probably not all you're gonna need to do and build with a framework like this. So I want to show like, hey, it isn't just simple forms. You can actually make this multi-user real-time applications using the same techniques. You saw how much that helped. By moving state to the server, and you can imagine the more state you put on the client, you introduce some problems, some issues. So you're going to introduce more libs, right? You start with your Redux and then sagas and then something else and start introducing more problems and it goes more complex. Well, is it really needed in all use cases? I think there's a place for it, but for stuff like this, I don't think so. By using web fundamentals, so these are proven technologies that everybody uses it. You don't have to be that worried about creating tech debt because well, it will most likely be working because some of the techniques that I showed here have been around since forever. So it's great to use these, but then yeah, you need something to be up to par with modern UX, and luckily a framework like Remix offers that. But even bigger, it's not really about Remix. In the end, this is just a framework. You already see a lot of these features creep into Next.js for the routing stuff, for instance. You see this moving up to React Router. So it's not really the framework, it's more the thought process behind it, which I find really interesting. Like, okay, let's see how we can actually just do this using the web instead of pushing everything to the client and to JavaScript. So it's good to sometimes take a look back at what we're doing and see these great strides for it. And with that, I want to say thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Hey, there you go.
First, any questions from the audience? Hard questions. Lucia.
I heard that Martin had a question. No. I saw you were talking about getting a multi-user application up and running using Remix. Whenever I think about multi-user and real-time, I also think about sockets. Do you know anything about Remix and WebSockets, or is that or two completely separate things?
No, I had the same question. I think a while back. I think it's very interesting to also look it up on YouTube. We had the Guru Talks from IO, and we had Ken C. Dots, one of the people also behind Remix, and I think we know him about a lot of React stuff. I actually asked him the same. I said, well, if we are using all these web platform stuff, why can't I use WebSockets? Because I need real-time stuff. And they agree, and they're working on it. It's coming sometime. It's super vague, of course. So in the meanwhile, you can always, I mean, if you run a WebSocket server somewhere, you can talk with it, right? But currently it's not in the Remix spec yet. But the nice thing now, by, for instance, having Superbase, and I think the same is with Firebase and a lot of these things, you can have these real-time databases, which is basically just a WebSocket where you can subscribe to. So for now, it's using something like that indeed. But no, they are adding it. But he also told me that 6 months ago. So I don't know when.
Oh, and I actually had another question. I saw that Remix in your presentation was used together with React.
Yeah.
Are you aware of any what? No, okay. Are you aware of any? Are you aware if Remix is usable using other frameworks as well, like Vue or Angular or Lit, whatever?
Lit, just a random framework. The biggest spokesperson for Lit. No,
Big question.
It's a super good question. Also a question I asked Kenzie Dots.
No.
We have the same questions. No, exactly, because it doesn't make sense, right? You preach everything about using web fundamentals and you don't use something like web components. Might be a bit of an easier, because it's actually currently very hard to do that. So that didn't make sense to me either. And what they're saying is they first just built it with React. They found that the most popular framework, and I guess if you want to grow your new framework, use the most popular one. They are planning on supporting whatever, whether it's Vue, whether it's I think what's the other one, Svelte, indeed, yeah, maybe even Angular, but also then web components. But for now, it's just React, unfortunately. There are some crazy people on GitHub who made their own ports, so it's actually already working for Vue, but you have to get it from this obscure guy. But he basically made it work. So yeah.
Is that some random guy on the internet?
Yes. Probably not this one, but another. Yeah. No, so definitely it's again here it's coming, but yeah, we have to wait on it, unfortunately.
Yes, Marta, you had a question?
So I was about to ask the same question about web components, but I do have another one. I found the use case of the fetcher very interesting.
Mhm.
So, if I'm correct, it uses the URL in the browser to catch your own data. So that's also can it be used for instance, if you have query string parameters to do pagination?
Definitely.
All right, then you solve the problem in my remix application. Thank you.
Yeah. Now even better. I mean, yeah, you can technically. I call it on the current route that you're at because that made sense, of course, for where my code was. You can definitely call whatever you want, any route. You basically it's a direct link to the loader of that URL. Um, what's also good to note is, for instance, next you have an API routes, and what you can actually do. It's called resource routes in Remix, but you can basically do the same. You can also make regular API routes because maybe you still want to expose something that you don't necessarily need for that page only. So you probably want to have it on one place and maybe create an API bit. And you can also, I think you can also call them with the loader, but why not use fetcher? The fetch.
Okay, thank you very much.
More questions? Yes.
Yeah, I got a question because you showed us a lot of backend work for a front-ender. How do you
Exactly.
see this in the future nest itself against all of those backend developers already there?
Pesky backend.
How you steal their thunder,
No,
basically?
I think one of the biggest part that you're making obsolete is maybe all these, well, let's not call them API builders. I was like, oh yeah, we need an API, all these sort of proxy developers. And I think this is as good as like, hey, I'm a front ender, I know JavaScript, and I know how to get some input and then fetch something. Because in the end, sort of my super base is sort of the real backend, right? And that also has an API, which actually going to store it in the database. So it's actually giving me the power to do it myself. But I think also for a backend developer, like, do you really want to do this all day long? Like a front-end developer, hey, why can't I retrieve this data? Why can't I retrieve this? You just want to say, whatever, here's the API, here are my Swagger docs, you can call it. So I think it's really the back of front-end instead of back-end. And we tend to call it back-end. Back of front-end, kind of a new term.
Yeah, so you would see like we had BFFs, but now they can be in the same app.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think Next.js did that really well. I think they, for me at least, they really. It's the first time I really saw that because, of course, get server-side props is identical to loader. It's exactly the same. You can do the exact same thing. But yeah, that really opened it up for us. It's like, okay, I can just have data, and I can also make smart decisions. For instance, maybe not send all the data to the front end because usually it's like, I'll just expose everything from my API. So I don't get emails from developers. Okay, also expose the date of birth or whatever. Yeah, so we have a bit more control. I think that's always a good thing.
Good, thanks.
Thank you.
More questions? No? Because I have one.
Oh no. That's the way you said it.
What do I need server side to get started? What are my requirements to have that there running?
This whole remix stack, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and that's where it really diverges from Next.js, because of course they are heavy on like static site increment or just static site generation in general. So this all runs on the edge, which sounds really cool. There's no static part of this; it's always deploying it like that. To be completely fair, when I was uploading this, I used Netlify, and I dragged my folder in there and said, "Hey, you're using Remix? Great. Here's the entire backend or the entire infrastructure." But yeah, as far as I read, because of course I didn't really need it to know a lot about it, it's all on the edge, which is I think what we hear a lot nowadays, or we hear more and more after the whole serverless thing. So that's what you need, yeah. You could probably, yeah. I mean, if you run this locally when you're developing this, you're running it on a node server, so I can imagine you can also host it like that. But it's not, but it's Yeah, they really want you to. Yeah, of course you can just use a node server, but I don't think that's the wisest, perhaps. Especially speed-wise, because you're making a lot of round trips, of course, building, working like this.
Okay. Well, Dave, thank you very much for your
Great time.
brilliant explanation and your bright answers. So I think Lucien is still struggling.
He doesn't want to.
Well, we have a short break of 15 minutes, and then we move on to Vincent. Music, please. Yes. Spooky music.
Music. Is it hip?
Hij doet het.
Ja, kijk.
Oké, jongens. We gaan weer verder.
Dat is niet goed.
Final check. No slides.
Nou, hand even uit en dan... Ja, deed net.
Okay. Well, Martin is checking the connections and getting everything ready. So if you go sit back and relax, take your drink. Yeah, sure. So we're looking at someone that can animate this logo. So CSS only, of course. No. The smoke has to swirl and the globe has to turn around. I have to spin. A demo. I can write it in an API.
Nog een keer doen?
So I give you the spinning speed and the smoke
past
speed
überhaupt niet
from an
bij
API,
me,
and then you animate it, right? that's.
Oh, wacht, sorry.
Yeah, I can generate a GIF. I used to make animated GIFs for websites. They were really cool. Yeah, right. So, okay. Well, test automation,
Ja.
because nobody of us like to test, so, and nobody else of us likes to code, so.
Oh, here.
So Vincent is going to take us on a little tour of how to do this better and easier, I hope.
I hope so.
Well,
Can you hear me all well?
Yes, sure.
Very nice.
Let's go.
Okay, good evening. Very welcome to be here. If you have viewed the last or the previous session, you will notice that there's, let's call it the black or white. The former session was a lot about coding. This session is all about no coding or less coding. Let's talk about automation. You can see my name. I will introduce myself a bit more. And as you can see, I'm working for Capgemini, senior test consultant. And I'm going to show you the lessons I've learned with codeless automation. But first, let's have an agenda. So what I will introduce myself, get some common ground on what test automation means, shine some lighting on codeless automation, and I have an example from one certain tool called Worksoft, which I work with at the Dutch Railways. On the left, you will see one of my mostly used quotes. The limits of my language mean the limits of my world. It means, with regard to codeless testing or full programming, if I don't know the coding language, I can't perform. I can't be, let's say, at that specific client because I don't have the exact knowledge. We'll come to that. First, an introduction of myself. So, Vincent Immink, working for Capgemini now for 4 years already. 47 years old, born in Rotterdam. I've been in testing ever since 1998. Been around. Started with manual testing, filling in forms. And ever since 2001, I started with test automation. I did my share of coding as well. And one of my bigger hobbies, and this is why I was attached to the Coven, is Magic the Gathering. So I feel this magical feeling, the fantasy around it. Very nice. Test automation common ground. So before we start with codeless automation, what does test automation mean? How do we, from a testing point of view, look at it? Well, first of all, a couple of slides about the situation we're facing at multiple customers, and I think it's recognizable. If you take a look at your typical client, you notice that they have a real big landscape, IT landscape with a lot of software for the internet, for the mobile phones, for the CRM, you name it, the IoT platforms, ERP suites. So there's a lot of different
technology in a typical customer landscape. And it's not only the landscape, because the landscape itself is never stable. It will always change. New applications, migration to applications, data might change or needs to be changed, and processes will be improved. So it's an ongoing business in a real tough, exciting IT landscape. And especially for the client, all this, mostly the value cases, the end-to-end flows, where they get their money from, needs to be tested. And with all this technology around, that's a big challenge. That's the technology part or the software part. And then there's the development way. So is it DevOps? Is it Agile? Is it outsourced so that you have other quality gates at different levels? So that's already a big challenge. And also, there was a world report on test automation. And slowly but surely they are coming up on the screen. These were the key observations. So if you take a look at the top ones, as I said, high frequency of application changes. The customer is always changing, so you need to be able to catch up with that. Availability of test data and environments, depending on your IT landscape, can be a real big issue. Because if you don't have the test date or the environment, you cannot perform the test. So 48%. The third one, the one we're going to discuss a bit more, the lack of right skilled, experienced people. So with that test automation, a lot of times we have the test automation framework. There are several frameworks available. Some of them require a high amount of coding. Some of them need a lower amount of coding, low code. And some tools don't need the language, so that might be one of the points we can cover. They don't have the right tools. Yeah, that depends on the situation at hand, what you are trying to test, and sometimes the tools they are using are not the proper ones for the test you're executing. Those were the observations. Some other challenges are the fact that when we start with test automation, we always have to take into concern that we have a lot that we will have maintenance. The data will change, the process will change, so our scripts will change. And for this, you need to reassure that you have enough time reserved for maintenance. That's always overlooked, underestimated. The second one, no clear testing approach. Just buy a tool, start doing your thing, and have a lot of fun. It all starts with your test approach. What do you want to test on which level? Which tools are we using? Versioning, data management, you name it. Have a proper plan before you start doing your test automation. And that's the same as the third bullet, same as I just mentioned. If you connect your approach with the tools, so which tool on which level, you will excel because you're using the proper tool on a proper level. You not sounds silly, but you're not going to do API on a UI, for instance. More common ground. So these are the challenges. This is the environment we're working in. And we always take into account the test automation pyramid, which is shown right now. What does it do? It divides your development cycle in a couple of layers. This is 4, it can be 3, it can be 5, depending on the levels of test you have written down, do you want to execute. And with this pyramid, we can start the discussion about not only, I'm not going to point, not only how many tests we're going to do on which level, but also on which level we expect the most test cases. And as you can see on the pyramid, below stated test quantity. So if we take a look at unit test, we expect the most tests to be executed on that level. They are in isolation, it's low cost. The higher we go up in this pyramid, the costs will go up because of the people you need, the tooling you need, your environments should be available. Your integration goes up because from the isolation part of your unit, you go into the integration test and then in bigger tests end-to-end chains. So then all the software is involved in the chain. So then you have a high integration, but your precision, reliability, speed is a bit lower. The unit tests or integration tests can be done in a flash. UI testing creating an order, for instance, in SAP takes like 15 minutes, 20 minutes. If you do the proper call on the API level, you can do this within a second. So this is about speed, reliability, because you are isolated. This has to be taken into account when you start your testing, automated testing. Always risk-based testing. No risk, no test. Fairly easy. So if you have an area of high risk, more tests, so more tests also on the unit test level. Yeah. Usually, we only the pyramid is viewed, or test automation is viewed pure on functional testing, because automation is often used for regression testing. That's a fact. But you also have to take into account the non-functionals. So how are we going to do? How are we going to test performance? Are we going to do it by ourselves? Shall it be outsourced? The same with security, GDPR, so the personal data. How do we deal with that on the different environments? And how are we going to prove that we comply to these laws, in fact? And it's not intended to be automated, but if you can automate it and you can start on the lowest level, I think you're really getting. There are some initiatives on security by design, for example. So get security and even performance sooner into your testing strategy, preferably automated. The key fundamentals, to my knowledge, for a proper test automation is, as I said, your strategy. You need to know what you are doing. You need to explain to people why you're doing it. And you need your stakeholders/sponsors. These are really important, especially in the beginning of your test automation journey. They will sponsor you. They will help you sell the product you're supplying. But you also have to report back. What did you do? What are the results on a daily basis? What are the trends we see during execution? You have to keep those really close to your team, close at heart. And it's not only just executing tests from your machine from 9 to 5. The machines are available, the environment is available. Do your lights out testing. So during the night, just execute the test, gather the results in the early morning, spread the word to the customer, to the environment about the state. And then you have used your 24 hours in a day, optimal. Yeah. Okay, dus codeless automation, the pyramid, risk-based. We have our sponsors. Now we're going to do codeless test automation. I ran into codeless test automation at one of our clients. And at first, as I said, I've been doing test automation from 2001, did some coding, and I was like, this is not going to work. I really felt that way. I started the job, and luckily, it proved me wrong for that time. So, what does it mean? We don't use code. It's plain English or the language you prefer, but let's keep it in English. You don't need to know C#, Java, .NET. You don't need to have this coding knowledge. So, my conclusion is, it empowers the real testers. Automated testers are all like the sheep with the 5 feet or legs, as I like to say. It's not only testing, it's not only communicating, it's also setting up the testing framework and maintaining it on a technical level. If we can take that leg away, we can focus more and more on the real testing part. Having that said, you can't do proper automation without proper logical thinking. You need a logical solution, queries or stuff like that, or you need to work around loopings. So it takes some knowledge about how to approach a code or how to logically build in your test. And that's the technical coding part of this exercise or this setup. But it doesn't involve the real code execution. And as I said, you cannot just buy something codeless, set some people on it, and here we go. Now you need to have these procedures and everything in place. It's also dependent on one of the next slides because of this codeless part. A lot of people will be attracted to it, but also a lot of people will will be wanting to help you out because it's really easy to get into it. And because everyone in the team focuses also on quality. Quality is, especially for the end customer, of high value. You need to have all these stuff in place in order to have your success as highly as possible. So what are the benefits for Codeless automation? Well, the first one is really easy to learn and adapt and transfer. So getting people on into speed during an assignment is really easy done. So they can join the teams earlier and they can start producing earlier. Your teams, because of this low, it works out itself. Because it's really easy to adapt, you can have multiple people doing the same thing. And I've seen it, that teams will collaborate more closely to each other, because not only do they understand where the quality is measured, but how we need to do it and how they can help us out. And so you have less need for highly technical skill. And I specifically say less, because Codeless automation doesn't cover the whole pyramid. It's mostly focused on the top, the UI. So if you go to the integration or unit level, especially unit level, you will need people with coding knowledge. Then how to implement this one? Because, as I said, it's really easy to get people into your teams. So we came up with the approach with the core and the satellites for this. So we have a core team, at that time 2 or 3 people. The core team is responsible for reporting, creating the baseline, training people, helping people on the job, and also it's functional and technical maintenance, depending on how this is set up in the organization. So we had a core team which was fully focused on test automation for this client, end-to-end, using multiple different kinds of techniques. So then, these were DevOps teams. In every DevOps team, we had 1 or 2 persons being our satellites. So not only were we moving towards Codeless, we also were less dependent on the tester part for their specific process knowledge, because the business people from the satellite could supply that to the one within the satellite who would deliver the scripts. So we trained all those satellites, not only training, but also creating the first scripts to be executed. As I said, test automation at this specific site, full on end-to-end regression, but set up a way that we can also support functional testing, or even on the development environment, development testing. So we were able to shift left. With the tool we were using, we were also able to shift right. So let's say robotics in production. It's not testing, but it's setting up data, and you can use the same scripts for this. Now, in order to have those people on board, the tool itself, most of those tools, it takes 2 days training, then you're on a certain level that you can start your own scripts, but also create your own inline training for those satellites, so that they know how to use the tool in their specific software. And for each role, so you have in the core, you have multiple roles, satellite has multiple roles, define this task and define the roles and the tasks, and depending on the roles, you can also determine the level of test automation knowledge they would need. So for test automation, I'm now going to give an example. This was created with Worksoft. The backend was a SAP system. I don't think it really cares. But what do we do? How do we start out with this tool? So we capture business knowledge. That's the first one. When we have this knowledge and we have all the data, we create the jigsaw pieces we need in order to fulfill the whole process. And we always created those puzzle pieces as reusable pieces. So they were completely environment agnostic, and they were data driven. So this was our most optimum way of getting all the different data sets through the test automation. The business people, the business user doesn't even know that he has all this knowledge. So this is why we want to capture. This is a really important part of capturing. You can do it one-on-one. So the business user explains and you create the scripts. You can have the user create the scripts. You can have the user create recording, which will then fit into your automated solution with Worksoft. Well, this is Worksoft as I use it. Don't mind the setup of the screen itself. Just take a close look. And as I say close, I mean close. Just see how the script looks. So you can easily read it. Left click, toevoegen, an add button, input the data, left click. I think this is really easily readable. And this is the way the user creates it with the aid of the tool. And the things we do after it has been delivered, we make all the variables needed to have the data-driven option fully available. So we have for betaalwijze, some numbers, some dates. That's what we work with, but it's all done by the tool. We don't code. So this is how scripts look. How is the script created? So Worksoft, this is the base of Worksoft. It offers 3, let's call it drop-downs, in fact, 3 options. Which system? Are you talking to the UAT? Are you talking to your hard drive? Are you starting up another program? Which object are we talking about within the screen, for instance? And what do you want to do? And it's all drop-down. And then it creates these lines for you. So then this is the real easy part. And then, as I mentioned, the logical part. This is just an example with the arrows and on the right. This is a loop in Codeless automation. So you need to still add one if I didn't find it, or if some time was passed. We checked if there was another round, and if there was still another round available, we went back into the loop, and it's all done on a bit lower level in Worksoft. But it's just open the line, get the data, and it's click or enter the new data. No coding. What you do see is a lot of weights. That's it happens all the time. This is most of the time the environment being slow. So this is how Worksoft works. This is how we explain it to all those DevOps/Scrum teams. And then they were off with the small remark that they were responsible not only for creating, but also, if we found errors, repairing and maintaining scripts. As I said, it's really easy to train people. Well, some figures. I started out myself with no knowledge on Worksoft. And after, I think, 3 or 4 months, I did everything. Technical, functional, creating scripts, training people. It's that simple. So training a user, 6 hours, 3 times 2 hours, and a first aid with creating the script. Advanced users, so the core team users, it will take them about a month to get up to speed. We did it with an intern. After 2 or 3 months, he was fully operational, and he created a specific part of the Dutch Railways SAP solution, and it was pretty advanced. So we had the opportunity to, with his solution, to test 100 different options if we had the time to, because slow environments. But again, it's just because it's codeless, it takes less time to train those people. And that's it.
Thank you, Vincent. Questions from the audience?
Yes, Dave. Yeah, I was wondering, so it becomes really easy and accessible for everybody to write these tests. Probably you end up with a lot of tests.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the things, of course, that is a bit for code and developers. Try to keep everything dry and
Yep.
having it simple, make it easy to upgrade. So how is that with a setup like this? Because I can imagine you have a lot of maybe duplicate parts of it. So how do you scale this, or how do you keep it up to date?
Keeping it up to date, focusing on this tool. This tool is an example. So the user creates the script that needs to be automated. It comes into a part of Worksoft called Analyze. And in that specific part of Worksoft, you can see the flows, so the screen names the user is going through during this test. If you then have, like we had this library of the already available puzzle pieces, jigsaw pieces, you can easily say, oh, we already have this one. So we're going to delete that part from the script and reuse the one we had. In the end, you would turn it around. We would rather have it turn around and say to people, okay, before you start, check this list. But we were not, that's something that was still lagging, so to speak. As I said, we were 2 or 3 people in the team, 10 DevOps teams. So not everything was done on a proper way, but that would be the solution. I would first show them what's available, and then they can pinpoint the puzzle pieces with the data, in fact.
And kind of like developers.
Kind of like, yeah. It's still like, as I said, you still need development skills. You need logical thinking. You can write your test scripts and all data and everything in those scripts, but then you have one script which will run once, and you throw it away. So that's my answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Question about the software you were using, the
Yeah.
Worksoft.
Worksoft. Yeah.
I noticed a lot of weights there.
Yeah.
And you were running your... those weights might need to be updated if API calls suddenly take longer than anticipated or something like that, which might be a good reason for a test to fail. But is there no way to say, okay, I'm waiting until, for example, a certain button appears?
True. That's exactly what we did. But somehow, in conjunction with Worksoft at that moment, technically did this not work. So we knew from previous experience that we could have wait on object, wait on page, wait on you name it. But somehow we couldn't overrule the time set standard for this waiting period. And that's something we discussed at that moment, but so we had to build in all those wait statements, and believe me, I really hate those statements.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I really do. But and that's something else. The main goal of this test is to, within certain time limits, show that the value for the customer is still there. Show them that the regression or the end-to-end flows are still working. There's no regression from a new release, for instance. But yeah, it's a pity we didn't get it up and running, but we were focusing on executing at that time instead of really beautifying it.
Yeah.
Good question.
All right. Thanks.
Lucien.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for that awesome presentation, man. I haven't seen before any time in my life.
Okay. Thanks. I
No.
guess. Yeah.
It's just a joke, and you know it.
Uh-huh.
I think that one of the last slides is the one that we all got triggered about. Oh, it's actually something remotely looking like code. One of the first lines I saw that triggered me was you are opening Internet Explorer.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is an old slide, I think.
2.5 years old, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Well,
Okay. You can get away with that.
Yeah, I know. I know.
The question is more about if I change that single line to let's now open a different application that does the same thing. So in the case of a browser, that's quite easy. We have multiple browsers that are, well, actually should be doing the same thing. So instead of opening Internet Explorer, we change that line to, let's say, Firefox.
Yep.
Does that also mean that we don't have to change the rest of the script because, well, it's English and we're not targeting the innards of Firefox directly?
The rest doesn't change. Yeah, I
Okay,
know that. I'm not sure if it's still the same as before. They did have a Chrome plugin, which you needed to execute your test on Chrome. But in fact, we were working on. So this was in fact we changed it also from Chrome, from Internet Explorer to Chrome, and we didn't have to change anything about the object part, luckily.
I would imagine because it's the same page, but on the other hand, you
yeah,
never know.
but it's all about tooling. Somehow
Exactly,
we think it's
exactly.
the same,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
they react in a
Ye-
different manner.
If you change Internet Explorer to Firefox, you probably have to wait less, but maybe that's a different story.
Yeah,
that-
but then I understand your question, but it's all about what is the customer using as the standard browser.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then it's if they say it's Internet Explorer, we just comply. That's it. Because it needs to work on that browser.
And nowadays you can throw them out the window, right? It needs to work on Internet Explorer. Have you read the latest statements about
Another
Internet
question,
Explorer?
maybe?
Okay. Yeah.
It's still around somehow.
True.
Oh, more questions.
Like it.
Yeah, is it only browser testing or it's also application testing?
It's depending on the tool you're using, I would say. With Worksoft, you can do. Let's put this correct. You can do browsing, you can do SAP, you can do desktop applications with Worksoft. We had some issues with some applications, so not all can be automated with Worksoft on an easy manner. But there's also on the market another tool called Eggplant, and this tool uses OCR on a high level. So then it becomes really easy because you only need your screen. So that would be nice. But we did a lot of automation like web, like SAP. I'm not sure the other ones, but we also ran into, I think it was a console application which we could not automate without making a hook in the server running the application. And that I thought went a bit too far for this specific goal.
We have that with SAP Business One.
Okay.
There are no hooks.
But that's what I said. You can automate much more. Like with Worksoft, it's true, and there are more of those codeless tools. But for instance, Worksoft, they started out on SAP, so they will excel on that part. But we've done test automation on the web side as well, and we even trained the users on a web browser before we showed them how to do it in SAP.
Cool. I will look it up.
Okay. You can always contact me.
It looked like the standalone application. Can it also be combined with the deployment process? So if you commit your code, it will run the scripts?
What I know from the Worksoft example is that we could integrate with the sub-solution manager. So that means that when new items are pushed to, let's say, your testing environment, the tests you assigned in SAP to this specific area or this change will be automatically executed. But there are other tools on the market, maybe not as codeless as this example, but still I view them as codeless, which can integrate with your DevOps pipelines, so with the spec flow, stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I'm not really one in the enterprise software, or I'm not familiar with the big enterprise software. I think Worksoft needs a license. As a beginner interested in codeless testing automation, are there any open source solutions that I could try out, or where do I start if I'm interested?
That's an open question for me as well. So as I said, I started with this codeless automation journey also internally with CAP because I was amazed by what we could do. And one of the first questions I had was like, okay, look, one of the downsides of these tools are the costs. That's true. So I was also like, isn't there any open source tooling available? I haven't started this search yet, but I'm really interested if it's available and how sizable or effective it is, how usable. Yeah. But with most of those tools, although they are expensive to acquire eventually, you can always get those training licenses for a couple of weeks. You can always start playing around with them. Worksoft, all the tools I mentioned, the Tosca, they all have real proper training programs online, freely available.
Okay.
So that's really nice.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
Okay. Yes. Time for the final question. That will be my question again. I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, I was already expecting it. Yeah.
You were expecting that.
Yeah.
How do you feel about?
The final question.
So we do a lot of unit tests.
Yep.
Obviously, the maintenance on unit tests is very low. How do you feel about maintenance on end-to-end testing? Is that substantial, or is that little, or
If you approach it properly, so I don't have a slide that should maybe have been in the common ground, but if you approach test automation, there are different layers you need to define or take into account on which you perform which test action level, and then you should have the lowest amount of maintenance within your team. But depends. How do you say this properly? Sometimes you have these data issues. So then we need to redefine the data itself. That's also maintenance. So it's maintenance on different levels. I think when you start out, that maintenance is higher than if you are a few months down the road. But I still view it. Yeah.
so? What is a typical team doing in respect to development test as maintaining tests?
Well, yeah. I think that at a certain time, I think we did like 20% of our time was maintenance. But it depends on the phase you're in. I've seen environments in which it was like 50-50 or 60-40 and then 60 maintenance. So it's the setup needs to be properly done. But as I showed already, you need a lot of support from everyone around you, because you need a lot of if you want to have your test data properly propagated to all the environments, for instance, you need your IT help. You need people who help you out, making your tests more stable. What we had with pure on scripting level, with Worksoft, we did not have a lot of maintenance on the script itself, except the building in the weights. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think that wraps it up
Yeah.
for us. There are more drinks after it, and Lucien is already starting to clap. Thank you, Vincent.
Thank you,
Dave.
for having me.
And
It's been a pleasure.
so we have some more drinks for you, and I will just put up the last slide so you can fill in our survey.
Check.
Check. Also for the viewers at home, I hope you can still see this. Martin? Yes? So the technical difficulties are soon to be over, and then a QR code is appearing on and off.
Live demos. React is broken again.
Tell the joke. No, that doesn't work.
Do it again.
I do it again. Yeah, there it is. Yay! So we hope to see you again on the December the 22nd. Hopefully. Christmas, snow plowing, that sort of stuff. But there will be warm glue wine, I guess. Maybe some Christmas presents for the tree and stuff. Yeah. And talks, of course. So if you want to talk, so if you have a talk, you can contact us via the meetup site. And then you redirect it to the meetup site so that you can skip that redirect. Thank you, guys.